The hum of the transport ship echoed softly through the empty corridors, a low vibration that once sounded normal to the crew but now felt like the heartbeat of something dying. Ethan sat at the control console, his fingers stained with engine grease and his jaw tight as he stared at the cracked navigation screen. Stars drifted past like cold, silent witnesses, and the blinking red alarms made the cabin glow with an uneasy light. He had tried every possible fix. The meteor storm had come out of nowhere. Dozens of burning rocks tearing through the ship's hull and leaving holes big enough to vent half their oxygen. The captain had ordered evacuation, and one by one the escape pods had launched into the dark. Ethan was supposed to be on one of them, but the last pod had malfunctioned, jammed halfway through its ejection cycle. And now he was here, on a crippled ship, drifting without power in an empty sector of space. He thought he was alone until he heard a soft sound, a cough, light but clear, from the passenger deck. Ethan froze. He grabbed a flashlight from the wall and walked carefully down the corridor, the beam cutting through smoke and drifting dust. Near the seating area, someone moved. She was sitting on the floor beside a broken seat, her hands trembling slightly. Her skin was pale, almost glowing in the red light, and her long hair shimmered like silver thread. She looked up as he approached, her eyes large and strangely luminous, reflecting his flashlight. "Don't move," Ethan said gently. "You're not hurt, are you?" The girl blinked, trying to focus. I think I'm fine." The seatbelt jammed. "Everyone else!" She looked around, then back at him, her expression falling. "They left, didn't they?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Escape pods. You must have been knocked out during the impact. What's your name?" "Lyra," she whispered. Her voice was soft, melodic in a way that didn't sound entirely human. "You're the engineer, aren't you?" "Yeah," he said, helping her stand. "Ethan, human maintenance crew. You're from the Oralis Colony Transport Group, right?" She nodded, wincing as she stood. "Yes, I was only supposed to travel for 2 days. I didn't expect this." Ethan gave her a sympathetic smile, even though he was trying not to show how bad the situation was. "Nobody did. But we're not out of options yet." They made their way to the control deck. Lyra followed quietly, glancing at the damage. Burned panels, shattered lights, and wires that hung like vines from the ceiling. She noticed how calmly Ethan moved, checking systems, switching power channels, typing commands that produced only weak sparks and error messages. "Can we reach anyone?" she asked finally. He sighed. "Comms are down. Power core's unstable. We've got maybe 72 hours of life support if I can keep the reactor breathing. After that..." He didn't finish the sentence. She lowered her head, her silver hair falling over her face. 72 hours. That's all." Ethan looked at her again. Her eyes weren't like human eyes. They had faint golden rings glowing faintly in the dim light. "Hey," he said softly. "Don't give up already. We'll figure something out." He started to work, pulling off a panel near the navigation hub. Lyra crouched beside him, watching carefully. "You're not afraid," she said quietly. "Most people would panic." "Fear's useless in a vacuum," Ethan muttered, trying to twist a wire back into place. "You panic, you waste oxygen." Lyra smiled faintly, her voice calm. "I've read that about humans. You act logical in crisis. You make jokes when you're dying." "Old habit," he said, chuckling dryly. "Keeps the hand steady." Hours passed as they worked side by side. The emergency lights dimmed as he redirected what little energy was left into life support. They had to choose, keep the ship warm or keep the oxygen filters running longer. Ethan chose oxygen. He told Lyra to put on a jacket from the survival locker. She did, her thin frame almost disappearing in the oversized human clothing. At some point she found a cracked viewport that still showed the stars outside. She stood there for a long time, staring. Ethan joined her, wiping his hands on a rag. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said. "It's different when you know you might never see it again," she replied softly. He looked at her quietly, noticing the way her eyes reflected starlight. "You're not like the others I've met," he said. "Most aliens I've worked with, no offense, keep their distance. You don't seem scared of me." Lyra turned her head slightly, studying him. "Should I be?" He smiled a little. "Humans have a reputation." "So do my kind," she said, her lips curving into a faint, knowing smile. "But reputations are just stories people tell. We're both still here, aren't we?" That made him laugh. It was the first real laugh in hours. Later, when the artificial lights flickered again, Lyra helped him drag emergency supplies into the main control room. They sealed the doors to keep the air stable. The room was small, lined with flickering panels, a few chairs, and one narrow bunk meant for short rest shifts. As Ethan checked the reactor levels, Lyra sat cross-legged nearby, holding a portable heater between her hands. She looked curious about everything, the tools, the control screens, even the warning lights. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, glancing at her. "That I'm on a ship with a stranger," she said simply, "and I'm not afraid." "Good," he said with a faint smile, "because I'd hate to be scary company." She tilted her head, watching him as he worked. "You humans, you don't give up, do you?" "Not really," he said, tightening a bolt. "We just keep fixing things until something finally works." She smiled quietly. "That sounds nice." When the silence returned, it was different this time. Not heavy or tense, but almost comfortable. Lyra studied the shape of the stars outside while Ethan scribbled notes on a datapad, tracking power usage and possible repairs. Occasionally, she would ask about Earth, about oceans and forests, and the way sunlight felt on human skin. Ethan tried to describe it as best he could, though it was hard to put something so familiar into words. "You'd like it," he told her. "The sunsets are gold and red. You'd think the sky's on fire, but it's just light scattering." She smiled softly. "My planet's sky is violet. When the sun sets, the whole world glows for a few moments. It feels like the universe is holding its breath. That sounds incredible." She looked at him and said quietly, "Maybe someday, if we survive this, I'll show you." Ethan chuckled. "I'll hold you to that." The hours dragged, but strangely, the fear began to fade. Lyra found small ways to help, handing him tools, reading diagnostics, even learning how to use a fusion cutter. Once, when she accidentally overloaded a circuit and sparks flew, she gasped and jumped back, startled. Ethan laughed gently and told her, "Don't worry. You didn't break anything I couldn't fix twice already." By the time they finally stopped to rest, exhaustion hit them both. Ethan sat on the floor back against the wall, while Lyra leaned near the viewport, hugging her knees. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was just quiet, steady breathing in a space that had forgotten what peace sounded like. After a long pause, she spoke again. "How do you do it, Ethan? How do you stay so calm?" He thought for a moment before answering. "I guess I've been through worse. When I was younger, I was stranded on an asteroid mining rig for 2 days before rescue. Lost a lot of people I worked with. After that, being scared didn't help. Staying busy did." Lyra nodded slowly. "I understand. We have a saying, still hands invite sorrow. It means to keep moving even when you're afraid. Guess your people and mine think alike." She smiled again. "Maybe we're not so different." He looked at her and realized he was starting to believe that. Despite her alien appearance, the faint glow of her skin, the shimmering hair, the unusual calm, she seemed more human than most people he'd met. When the lights dimmed completely and the power saver mode engaged, they were left with only the soft glow of the stars through the viewport. Ethan lay down on the floor, his head resting against his jacket. Lyra hesitated, then sat beside him, wrapping the survival blanket around both of them to share warmth. Neither spoke for a long time. The quiet was almost soothing. Finally, she said softly, "Do humans always stay calm before the end?" He opened one eye, looking at her faint outline in the dim light. "Only when there's someone worth staying calm for." She turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "You mean me?" He gave a small, tired smile. "Well, you're the only one here. Might as well make a good impression." Lyra's laugh was soft, barely audible, but real. It echoed gently in the small cabin, breaking the stillness of space. Ethan closed his eyes, letting the sound linger. For the first time since the crash, he felt something like hope. Small, fragile, but alive. Outside, the stars burned silently, and the broken ship drifted through the endless dark. Two strangers, one human, one alien, shared warmth, quiet words, and a fragile sense of connection neither of them expected to find. And in that lonely silence, a strange companionship began to grow, like a tiny spark refusing to die in the cold of space. The emergency lights hummed faintly as Ethan worked on the main reactor panel. Sparks occasionally flew, and the smell of heated metal mixed with recycled air. Lyra watched him closely, her long hair falling over her shoulders, reflecting the dim red glow. She had a careful curiosity about her movements, almost like she was learning how to exist in a human environment. Yet her golden-ringed eyes held a depth of thought Ethan couldn't fully understand. "You're really good at this," she said softly. Ethan wiped his forehead and shrugged. "I've had practice. But this ship, it's more trouble than it's worth." Lyra tilted her head. "You humans always underestimate things you don't understand. You don't see the full potential," he smirked. Maybe we just know what's broken." She chuckled quietly. There was something melodic in her laugh, soft and calming like a quiet song in the background of the chaos. Ethan noticed how naturally she adapted to his presence, how her hands moved carefully but confidently when she helped him check wires or hold tools. "You can help me," he suggested, pointing to a panel with a dangling wire. "Careful, it's live." Lyra nodded and crouched beside him. Her fingers were delicate but steady as she followed his instructions. "Like this?" she asked. "Exactly," he said, impressed. "You're a fast learner," she smiled faintly, glancing out the viewport. "In my world, I had to learn quickly, too. Survival isn't always easy," Ethan nodded. He recognized that look, the one people get when they've seen more than their share of danger. "You've faced things humans can't even imagine, haven't you?" Lyra didn't answer at first. She just adjusted a cable and tightened a screw. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, "I've seen planets die, ships fail, families lost. I thought I would be alone forever, floating among strangers. But this is different." He paused, considering her words. "Different good or different bad?" "Good," she said immediately. "Different good. You care, even though I am, well, different from you. That matters." Ethan looked at her carefully. There was a purity in her statement, something unspoken that he couldn't quite name. He returned to his work, but he felt a small warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the ship's reactors. Hours passed as they repaired what they could. Lyra asked questions about human tools, curious about why they worked the way they did. Ethan explained the basics of wiring, power distribution, and safety protocols, often demonstrating with a tool or part. She watched his hands carefully, mimicking his motions, and occasionally her fingers brushed his. Each time he felt a small spark of something he didn't expect in this empty, broken ship. When a small spark jumped from a wire near Ethan's hand, he cursed quietly. Lyra jumped back instinctively, placing her hands over her mouth. I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't worry. You didn't hurt me," he said, trying to sound casual though his heart was racing. "Everyone jumps the first time something sparks." She relaxed slightly, though she kept her hands folded in front of her. "I guess humans enjoy chaos," she said softly, more as a thought than a question. "Depends on the kind of chaos," Ethan replied, finally reconnecting the wire. "Controlled chaos, not the kind that rips your ship apart." They worked side by side, the tension slowly easing. Sometimes they didn't speak at all, letting the hum of machinery fill the silence. It was strange, but the quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt almost comforting, like the ship itself had accepted them as its temporary caretakers. Later, when the reactor level stabilized slightly, Ethan let himself lean back against a panel and wipe his face with a rag. Lyra sat beside him, her eyes on the viewport. Outside, the stars moved silently, distant suns burning against the endless black. "Your sky is different, isn't it?" Ethan asked after a long pause. She nodded. "Very different. On my world, there are 2 suns and they move slower than yours. The light is softer, more forgiving. People say it feels like time moves differently there." Ethan smiled faintly. "Sounds like a place worth visiting." Lyra looked at him, the faintest of smiles crossing her lips. "Maybe someday, if I survive this journey." He nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "We'll make it. I don't see why we wouldn't." As the hours passed, conversation became their way of passing time. Lyra asked him about Earth, about oceans, mountains, and forests. She wanted to know about people, families, and how humans spent their days when not working. Ethan tried to explain in simple words, describing beaches where water shimmered under sunlight, the feeling of sand between toes, and the taste of fresh fruit picked from a tree. "You speak with so much feeling," she said quietly. "In my world, we speak facts, not feelings. Yet you humans make the world feel alive." Ethan chuckled softly. "We like to notice small things. Little things matter." She nodded, thoughtful. "Perhaps that is why your kind survives. You care, even for small things." For the first time, she told him about herself in small pieces. She was part of a long mission to study uncharted systems. Her homeworld trusted her intelligence and her ability to adapt. But even with all her training, she hadn't expected the storm, the crash, and the feeling of near isolation in the void. "I thought I would be alone," she said, looking down at her hands. "But now, you are here. I do not feel alone." Ethan glanced at her, feeling a mixture of pride and unease. He wasn't used to companionship beyond colleagues or family. Lyra's presence was quiet but demanding attention, asking for care without asking outright. The ship shuddered, and alarms flared briefly. Ethan jumped up, running to check the systems. Lyra followed, crouching beside him and watching as he stabilized the small bursts of energy. "You are calm again," she noted softly. "Even when the ship shakes, even when alarms scream." "Calm doesn't mean fearless," he said. "It means you don't waste energy being scared. You focus on what you can fix." She absorbed his words, nodding slowly. "I understand that. That is something I can learn from." Later, as night fell, or rather as the ship's cycle dimmed to simulate night, they found a small corner of the ship that still retained warmth. Ethan had rigged a temporary blanket from emergency supplies. Lyra sat beside him, sharing the fragile warmth. "Humans share warmth differently," she said, curiosity in her tone. "Guess we do," Ethan replied with a faint smile. "It's practical. Keeps you alive. Also, it's comforting." She looked at him for a long moment, and he felt the weight of her gaze. "You humans are strange," she whispered, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You are fragile, yet you endure. You are small, yet you can protect a— I guess we have to," Ethan said simply. "Life doesn't give us many choices." She leaned slightly against him, resting her head lightly. "I do not know if my kind would do this. Stay close, without need, without fear. But with you, it feels right." He didn't respond at first, letting the moment stretch. Outside, stars continued their silent march. Inside, two strangers from completely different worlds shared warmth, stories, and small moments of trust that could only exist in extreme isolation. Eventually, Lyra whispered almost to herself, "How do humans pass the time when waiting?" Ethan laughed softly, shaking his head. "We talk, we play games, we tell stories, and sometimes we hope." She considered that quietly, her golden ringed eyes reflecting starlight. "Then tell me one." Ethan smiled faintly. "A story about courage, about humans, about hope." He spoke softly, describing battles of old, the sacrifices people made for strangers, and the way humans found light in the darkest places. When he finished, Lyra stayed silent for a long moment. Then softly she said, "Your kind loves fiercely, even when it seems impossible, that is beautiful." Ethan gave her a faint smile. "It's what keeps us alive." The hours drifted slowly into exhaustion. The ship remained damaged but stable. Outside, the stars glimmered endlessly, indifferent yet magnificent. Inside, a fragile connection grew between a human and an alien. The first step of a companionship neither had expected but both now silently relied upon. They didn't sleep, not yet. Instead, they sat side by side, sharing warmth, stories, and quiet smiles, waiting for the next step in survival. In the emptiness of space, their small acts of cooperation and trust became the heartbeat of the broken transport. For Ethan and Lyra, the hours didn't just pass, they became moments to understand each other, to see courage reflected in the other's eyes, and to quietly discover that hope could survive even in the coldest void. The next morning, the dim red glow of emergency lights cast long shadows across the control room. Ethan sat hunched over the damaged navigation console, his hands moving quickly as he tried to reroute power to the communications array. The hum of the ship was uneven, a reminder of how fragile it had become. Lyra crouched nearby, her fingers brushing lightly over the control panels as she assisted, her golden-ringed eyes attentive and sharp. "Look at this," Ethan said, pointing to a flickering display. "The comm signal is weak, but there's something there. A faint frequency. Could be a distress beacon?" Lyra leaned closer, intrigued. "A signal? From who?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "Could be anyone, another ship, a station. But it's the first contact we might be able to make since the crash." Her expression lit up with hope, but worry quickly followed. "Can we reach it?" Ethan shook his head. "Not with the current power levels. The array needs more energy than the reactor can safely provide right now. If we try to boost it, the reactor might fail completely. We'd be stranded with no oxygen. Lyra sat back, processing the risk. But if we do nothing... I know, Ethan said softly. We'd die here anyway. We have to decide if we risk the reactor to send the signal or just wait for rescue that may never come. They both fell silent, the weight of the decision pressing on them. Outside the viewport, the stars drifted slowly, indifferent to the tiny human and alien lives trapped inside the ship. Finally, Lyra broke the silence. Then we try, together. Ethan looked at her, surprised at the firmness in her voice. Together? Yes, she said simply. I will not leave this to chance alone. We face it together. The plan was simple but dangerous. They would redirect the remaining reactor power into the communications array, sending a short burst toward the source of the signal. It might succeed or it might fry the reactor entirely. Either way, they would be at the mercy of the void if it failed. Ethan took a deep breath. All right, let's do it, they began preparations. Lyra followed his instructions carefully, helping reroute energy conduits, ceiling panels, and manually adjusting voltage regulators. Her fingers were quick and precise, surprisingly adept despite her alien physiology. Sparks flew occasionally, but she remained calm, her focus unwavering. You're amazing at this, Ethan said as she guided a connector into place. How do you stay so steady? In my training, Lyra replied quietly. We learn to control fear. Panic is useless. It only makes things worse. Ethan smiled faintly. Sounds familiar. Hours passed as they worked in tense silence, the hum of the ship punctuated by occasional sparks and low alarms. Finally, they were ready. Ethan glanced at Lyra. Are you ready? She nodded, gripping a stabilizer bar. Ready. Ethan activated the burst sequence. The ship shuddered violently, alarms screamed, and sparks flew from the walls. Lights flickered as the reactor strained under the sudden surge. Ethan shouted numbers and coordinates while Lyra steadied the console and monitored energy output. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then the communications array flickered. A weak response appeared, a faint signal acknowledging their transmission. We did it, Ethan shouted, relief flooding his voice. Somebody heard us. Lyra's eyes sparkled. We survived this moment. They collapsed on the floor, exhausted, laughing and breathing heavily. The small victory brought a sense of relief neither had expected. They sat side by side, leaning against the control panel, sharing a rare smile in the cold, empty ship. But the relief was short-lived. The reactor was now unstable, warning lights flashing more urgently than ever. Ethan groaned. We have maybe another 24 hours if we push it too hard again. Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of reassurance. Then we make the most of it. Time is precious now. He nodded, realizing she was right. They couldn't waste the hours with fear or despair. Survival meant action, but it also meant learning to live in the moment. As the ship drifted through space, they decided to make the time productive. Lyra asked Ethan to teach her more about human survival skills. He showed her how to ration supplies, repair minor ship systems, and use emergency tools effectively. She absorbed every detail, her curiosity and determination driving her forward. In return, Lyra shared her knowledge of alien technology and survival techniques. She explained the basics of energy conduits, alien sensors, and environmental controls, giving Ethan insights that could help stabilize the ship further. He realized that working together like this, combining human ingenuity with alien knowledge, increased their chances far more than either could alone. During a brief pause, Ethan glanced at her. You're incredible, he said quietly. Lyra looked down, slightly embarrassed. I just do what is needed. You humans, you act on hope. I think that is why we work well together. He smiled faintly. Hope is powerful, sometimes stronger than technology. The conversation shifted naturally to stories. Ethan told her about Earth, describing oceans, mountains, and forests in vivid detail. Lyra listened with fascination, her eyes wide as she imagined a world she had never seen. In return, she described her homeworld, a place of violet skies, slow-moving suns, and glowing forests. Ethan was captivated by her words, imagining the beauty of a planet so different from Earth. You make it feel alive, she said softly. Even though I have never been there, I can see it clearly. Thanks, Ethan replied, smiling. I guess that's the power of stories. They laughed softly at small jokes, finding humor in the absurdity of their situation. Two strangers, one human and one alien, trapped on a broken ship, sharing stories and skills to survive. Later, as the reactor stabilized slightly, they sat near the viewport watching the stars drift by. Lyra leaned against him, her small warmth comforting against the chill of the ship. "Ethan," she whispered, "when we are rescued, will you remember this time?" "I think I will," he said quietly. "It's hard to forget when survival depends on someone else, someone you trust." She smiled faintly. "I trust you." The moment stretched between them, simple but profound. Outside, the universe was vast and indifferent, but inside the small broken ship, two lives had intertwined through courage, trust, and mutual reliance. As hours turned into night cycles, Ethan noticed that Lyra seemed to be observing him more closely. She was curious about human behavior, gestures, and expressions. He realized that she wasn't just learning to survive physically, she was learning about humanity itself. "You notice things humans don't?" she asked suddenly. "Sometimes," he replied. "We notice because it matters to us. Little things can change everything," she nodded slowly. "On my world, details are often ignored in favor of logic. But you balance both." Ethan felt a rare warmth at her words. He wasn't used to praise, especially from someone so intelligent and different from himself. "Maybe that's why we survive," he said quietly. "Adaptation and attention." They fell silent again, letting the quiet fill the space. Ethan checked the reactor one more time, ensuring the fragile systems held. Lyra watched him work, her gaze soft and reflective. She reached out and gently touched his arm. "You are human," she said softly. "Yet your spirit is strong. I admire that." Ethan looked at her, meeting her eyes. "And you're amazing too. Brave, smart, and patient. We're lucky to have each other." A faint smile crossed her lips and she leaned closer. "Then we continue. Together." The night, or the artificial night, passed quietly. They shared stories, laughter, and small tasks to keep busy, making the hours feel lighter despite the danger outside. In the small, damaged ship drifting through endless space, Ethan and Lyra found companionship and hope, the first threads of trust and friendship weaving between two very different beings. By the time the next cycle of the ship's simulated day began, they had accomplished something more than repairs and survival. They had learned to rely on each other, to understand each other's strengths, and to face the unknown together. It was a fragile connection, but one that gave them both strength and courage. The signal they had sent still flickered faintly, a reminder that hope was possible. Ethan and Lyra sat together near the control deck, hands brushing occasionally, speaking softly, and sharing quiet moments of understanding. The universe outside was still vast, cold, and empty, but inside, a fragile warmth persisted, born of trust, courage, and the simple act of surviving together. For the first time since the crash, neither of them felt entirely alone, and in the void of space where silence stretched endlessly, that realization was worth more than anything else. The broken transport floated silently through space, its damaged hull creaking under the strain of the void. Ethan and Lyra had grown used to the soft hum of failing systems and the flicker of emergency lights. Each movement required caution. Each breath was precious. The reactor had stabilized enough to keep life support running, but their oxygen reserves were dwindling. They had survived the worst of the meteor storm, but the quiet danger outside and the slow drain of their life systems made every moment feel heavy. Lyra sat cross-legged near the viewport, her long hair falling over her shoulders like liquid silver. She stared out into the black expanse, her eyes reflecting the distant stars. Ethan watched her quietly from the control panel, noticing the calm in her posture, the serene patience in her expression. She didn't fidget or panic. She simply existed, alert yet composed. "You're very different from anyone I've met," he said softly, breaking the silence. Lyra turned to him, tilting her head. "And you are not afraid even when everything fails." "Not afraid doesn't mean comfortable," he replied. "It means I focus on what I can fix. Fear doesn't repair a ship." She considered that for a moment, her gaze drifting back to the stars. "We think alike then. My people try to act without emotion, but sometimes we forget that fear is part of survival. You humans, you use hope. That is your strength." Ethan smiled faintly. "Hope and stubbornness." "Mostly stubbornness." Lyra laughed softly, a gentle musical sound that seemed to fill the empty cabin. It made Ethan feel lighter, as though the weight of the broken ship and the emptiness of space had been momentarily lifted. "I want to pass the time," she said after a pause, her voice quiet but firm. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Pass the time?" "Yes," she said, leaning back against the wall. "We wait for rescue. We cannot leave. We have limited energy, limited air, and yet I do not want to waste what little remains. I want to live even while waiting." He nodded slowly. "Then we do what humans do in waiting. We talk, we share stories, we play small games. We find ways to make the hours meaningful." She smiled. "Then teach me, human. Teach me how to pass the time," and so they began. Ethan showed her simple human games that required only memory and imagination. They made up stories about strange planets, heroic humans, and alien civilizations. Lyra laughed at his dramatic narrations, often correcting details based on her own knowledge of space phenomena. Their playful banter created a fragile bubble of life within the ship's small, damaged walls. At one point, Lyra pulled out a small data pad from her pack. It contained star maps, planetary scans, and notes from her research missions. She showed him exotic planets with rings of crystal, moons that glowed in multiple colors, and systems with 3 suns. Ethan was fascinated. He asked questions, and she explained the science behind each phenomenon, simplifying the technical details so he could understand. "You make this sound magical," Ethan said, staring at an image of a blue gas giant surrounded by violet moons. "That is the truth," Lyra replied softly. "You humans sometimes reduce things to feelings, but the universe is full of wonder even without them. I want you to see it even in these small moments." As the hours passed, their companionship deepened. They shared stories of their lives before the journey. Ethan spoke of Earth's oceans, of summer nights near the water, of quiet streets and the smell of rain. Lyra told him about her homeworld, of violet forests, slow-moving suns, and glowing rivers that reflected starlight. Their worlds seemed impossibly far apart, yet they connected through the shared experience of isolation and survival. Sometimes they fell silent, simply existing beside each other. Ethan would repair a panel or reroute power while Lyra studied the stars or adjusted a sensor. Their hands occasionally brushed, and each time it was a reminder of warmth, trust, and presence in a universe that was otherwise cold and indifferent. Later, they found an old shipboard game on a console. It was simple, meant for crew entertainment, a kind of puzzle and strategy mix. Ethan showed Lyra how to play, and they competed quietly, laughing softly at their mistakes and small victories. Lyra's alien mind approached the puzzles differently, sometimes giving her an advantage, sometimes putting her at a disadvantage. Ethan enjoyed the challenge and the quiet companionship. "You're clever," he said after she solved a particularly tricky puzzle. "I learned quickly," she replied, her tone modest. "But your approach, your creativity, it is different from my people." "I like it." Their conversation eventually turned more personal. Lyra asked about human courage, about why humans risked themselves to help strangers, about what made them endure against impossible odds. Ethan answered honestly, describing his experiences, the loss he had seen, the friends he had failed to save, and the simple, stubborn drive to keep moving forward despite fear. "You carry much on your shoulders," Lyra said quietly. "We all do," he replied. "Some of us just choose to keep moving instead of giving up." She nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You teach me something important. Even when things are hopeless, even when death is close, you can still choose to live fully. That is remarkable." Ethan felt a rare warmth at her words. "Maybe it's what keeps us alive," he said softly. "Hope, stubbornness, and sometimes companionship." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the dim glow of the emergency lights. "Then we continue together. Even in this void, we are not alone." They shared a small, quiet smile. The simplicity of the statement carried weight, an acknowledgement of trust, connection, and the fragile human-alien bond forming in the isolation of space. As their temporary night cycle approached, Ethan checked the life support levels. Oxygen remained low but stable. Lyra adjusted a small heater, making the small corner of the ship slightly warmer. They shared the blanket he had improvised, sitting shoulder to shoulder. The warmth between them was both physical and emotional, a small comfort in the vast emptiness outside. Lyra leaned slightly toward him, her voice soft. "Ethan, when we are rescued, will you remember this time?" "I think I will," he said, his voice quiet but steady. Not because of the danger, but because of you. Because of what we shared in the middle of nowhere. She smiled faintly, a delicate warmth in her expression. Then I will remember too. This is a moment. A small moment in the universe, yet it is important. Because it reminds me that life is more than survival. Ethan nodded, understanding completely. In the emptiness of space where silence stretched endlessly, connection and shared moments became far more valuable than any technical repair or mechanical success. They had learned to trust, to laugh, and to live fully in the small hours they had left. Hours later, fatigue set in. They sat quietly, leaning against each other, listening to the hum of the ship and the faint creaks of its strained hull. Outside, the stars moved slowly, indifferent yet majestic. Inside, the two companions had carved out a fragile sanctuary, a place where hope, curiosity, and trust survived. Before they finally rested, Lyra whispered almost to herself, "Time feels different here. Moments stretch, but they are full." "I understand now what it means to pass the time." Ethan smiled faintly. "Then we did it right. That's all we can do, live in the moments we have." They closed their eyes, letting the quiet envelop them. Outside, the universe remained vast, cold, and uncaring. But inside, warmth, trust, and companionship created a small bubble of life. In a broken ship drifting through endless space, Ethan and Lyra had discovered a simple truth. Even in despair, shared moments, courage, and connection could make time worth living. And in that silence, in the glow of emergency lights and distant stars, two beings, human and alien, sat together, passing the hours in quiet understanding, laughter, and a fragile, growing friendship that neither had expected, but both now relied upon. The faint signal they had sent days ago finally began to respond with clarity. Ethan and Lyra were in the control room when the console beeped repeatedly, announcing incoming communications. The small flicker of light on the panel made them both tense. The ship's systems were fragile, and any sudden surge could trigger another failure, but this was their only chance. Ethan leaned forward, hands trembling slightly, as he worked the controls. "Signal is strong enough to stabilize. I think someone's picking up our distress call." Lyra crouched beside him, her golden-ringed eyes wide with anticipation. "Are they coming for us?" "I hope so," Ethan said quietly. "We've got no other choice," the communicator crackled. A voice, distorted but human, came through. "This is the rescue vessel Horizon. We read your signal. Please confirm your status. Are you safe?" Ethan pressed the confirm button. "This is Ethan Miller and my companion Lyra. Our ship is damaged. We are stable for now, but require immediate assistance. Coordinates transmitted." Lyra's small smile appeared, relief softening her alien features. "We will not be alone anymore," she whispered. The rescue process began cautiously. Horizon's smaller shuttles maneuvered near the broken transport, tethering carefully to avoid further damage. Ethan and Lyra followed every instruction precisely, their hands steady despite exhaustion. Every successful maneuver was a small victory, a reassurance that their struggle had meaning. Once the docking clamps engaged, the small shuttle's ramp lowered. Ethan helped Lyra onto the shuttle, careful of her unfamiliar form. She glanced back at the transport, her expression thoughtful. "It was fragile," she said softly, "but it carried us through." Ethan nodded. "It did, and we made it this far because we worked together." The shuttle detached and carried them toward Horizon. Inside, the hum of active engines and well-maintained life support systems was almost overwhelming after the silence of their broken transport. Humans and aliens of various species bustled around, tending to equipment, monitoring systems, and checking logs. Lyra's eyes widened as she absorbed the organized chaos. A rescue officer approached them. "We read your distress call. You are safe now. Can you tell us what happened?" Ethan quickly explained, summarizing the crash, the damage to the transport, and the life-saving measures they had performed together. Lyra translated where necessary, her voice calm and precise. The crew listened in awe at the description of their teamwork, the ingenuity in stabilizing the reactor, and the patience with which they endured the void. "You two survived against impossible odds," the officer said finally. "Your resourcefulness is remarkable." Ethan shrugged. "We did what we had to do. We had each other." Lyra's small hand brushed his arm lightly. "Together," she added, her voice soft but firm. Once they were safely aboard Horizon, they were led to a recovery chamber. Medical staff checked their vitals, administered nutrients, and ensured that oxygen levels returned to normal. Ethan leaned back against the bed, feeling the warmth and stability that had been missing for so long. Lyra sat beside him, adjusting the blanket wrapped around his shoulders. "You look different," she said quietly. "Calmer, safer." "I feel it," Ethan admitted. "For the first time in days, I feel like we're not just surviving. We're living again." Outside the chamber, Horizon's crew worked efficiently. Sensors scanned for damage in the surrounding space. Engineers analyzed the broken transport remotely, marveling at the survival of the structure despite severe trauma. Ethan and Lyra had not only endured, they had succeeded in preserving the ship long enough to call for help. As the hours passed, Ethan and Lyra spent time together in quieter areas of the ship. They walked the corridors, watched the stars from observation decks, and discussed the journey ahead. Their bond, forged in isolation and adversity, had grown stronger, shifting from simple cooperation to mutual respect and understanding. Lyra glanced at Ethan while they watched a nearby nebula glow in vivid colors. "You humans, you hold on to hope even when the universe seems to ignore you. I do not think I could have survived without seeing that." Ethan smiled faintly. "And you taught me patience, precision, and perspective. You helped me see the universe in ways I never imagined." For the first time, Lyra allowed herself to express gratitude openly. "I am thankful for your guidance, your courage, your companionship. You made the impossible possible." Ethan looked at her, his chest tightening with an emotion he didn't often acknowledge. "I'm glad I was there, and I'm glad you were too." The next day, Horizon's crew made plans to return them to safety. Coordinates were set for a nearby space station, capable of repairing both humans and alien travelers. The transport, though damaged, would be salvaged later. Lyra and Ethan prepared themselves for departure, organizing supplies and reviewing what they had learned. Before leaving, Lyra lingered near the viewport of the shuttle bay. She looked back at the broken transport, her gaze reflective. "It was fragile, yes," she said softly, "but it carried more than just life. It carried trust, courage, and the strength of our connection." Ethan nodded. "We made it through, and we'll carry that strength forward." As they boarded a shuttle bound for the station, they sat side by side, watching the transport fade into the distance. The vastness of space stretched endlessly, but neither felt small. They had survived, adapted, and discovered that even in isolation, companionship could thrive. During the journey, Lyra asked about human rituals, small customs that marked life and relationships. Ethan explained celebrations, shared meals, and the ways humans honored survival, friendship, and courage. Lyra listened attentively, fascinated by how simple acts carried deep meaning. "You humans, you cherish small things," she said quietly. "I can understand why. Even in the void, small victories matter. They give life purpose." Ethan glanced at her. "Exactly. And sharing them makes them even stronger." The shuttle landed safely on the station. Horizon's crew escorted them to a recovery area where they could rest and recuperate. Medical staff confirmed their health, and engineers assured them that the transport would be retrieved and repaired later. Lyra turned to Ethan as they were led to their quarters. "We survived because we trusted each other. Because we worked together. That is something I will never forget." Ethan smiled. "Neither will I. And when we return to our worlds, we'll carry these lessons with us. Courage, patience, trust, hope." In the quiet of the recovery chamber, they sat side by side. Lyra looked at him, her golden-ringed eyes reflecting a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and quiet warmth. "You humans, you make life worth passing the time," she said softly. Ethan chuckled. "And you aliens, you teach humans how to survive with elegance and thoughtfulness. Together we make a good team." As the stars outside shone silently, Ethan and Lyra shared a moment of understanding. They had faced isolation, danger, and the endless void of space. They had passed time with courage, companionship, and hope. And they had emerged stronger, not just as survivors, but as friends who had learned the value of trust and connection across worlds. Days later, the station's engineers began repairs on their transport. Ethan and Lyra assisted where they could, sharing knowledge, skills, and careful precision. They laughed at small mistakes, celebrated successes, and continued passing the time together, no longer trapped in fear, but in a shared journey that had changed them both. As the transport was restored, ready to continue its voyage, Lyra looked at Ethan. "We began this journey alone in the void. But we ended it together. That is more than survival, Ethan nodded. It's life. And it's worth every moment we passed together. When the transport finally lifted off from the station, gliding smoothly through space, Ethan and Lyra stood side by side on the observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly before them, vast and indifferent. Yet within the small, fragile ship, a human and an alien had discovered courage, trust, and the quiet strength of companionship. In the emptiness of space, they had passed the time. And in doing so, they had learned what truly mattered. Survival was not just about staying alive, but about finding connection, hope, and meaning, even in the coldest void. As the ship drifted toward new horizons, Ethan glanced at Lyra. We'll face whatever comes next. Together. Lyra's small smile reflected the light of distant stars. Together, she whispered. The universe stretched endlessly ahead, but they were ready. Not just to survive, but to live side by side in the fragile, beautiful moments that made life worth passing the time. And so, two beings from different worlds, once alone in the void, sailed toward the unknown, strengthened by courage, trust, and the quiet, unwavering bond they had forged in the heart of the broken transport.